He, a ruthless patriarch, seeks to protect his bloodline. She, the granddaughter of the housekeeper, loves his grandson, Brian. The patriarch, Oswald, gravely ill, leaves a fortune to Marianne, with a cruel condition. She must choose between the wealth or Brian's love. Her heart breaks. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The alarm clock blared at 5 a.m. as always. Marianne Farrell opened her eyes in the small room at the back of the mansion, where the wallpaper was peeling and the window let in only a faint ray of light. 28 years of life on that estate, and she still felt like an outsider in her own home. Daughter of the housekeeper, granddaughter of the housekeeper, destined to be a housekeeper. That's how the world saw her, and for a long time, that's how she saw herself. She rose silently, ran the brush through her brown hair, and pinned it into a simple bun. In the cracked mirror, her green eyes reflected a determination that had grown over the years. She was no longer the shy girl who hid behind her grandmother's skirts when the bosses passed through the hallways. Little by little, she had found her voice, her strength, even though she always knew her place in that immutable hierarchy. The kitchen was already bustling when she went downstairs. Donna, her mother, commanded the Vasconcelos family's breakfast with the precision of a general. 55 years dedicated to that house, and she knew every taste, every whim, every routine of the bosses better than they did themselves. "Marianne, Mr. Oswald wants to speak with you after breakfast," Donna said, without looking up from the French toast she was preparing. "He was agitated last night." "The doctor came again." Marianne's heart clenched. Oswald Vasconcelos, the 80-year-old patriarch, was getting increasingly frail. And when he became frail, he became more cruel, as if he wanted to prove that he still had power over everyone around him. She nodded and began to arrange the china cups on the silver cart, each movement automated by decades of repetition. Across town, in a penthouse apartment that occupied 2 entire floors, Brian Mendez finished his 3rd shot of espresso while reviewing reports on his tablet. Even at 30 years old, his face still held something youthful, but his dark eyes carried the weight of expectations that weren't his own. The direct heir to the Vasconcelos empire, he had been molded since childhood to assume responsibilities he never asked for. The phone rang. It was Michael, his personal assistant. "Brian, your grandfather is asking you to come to the ranch today. He said it's urgent. I've cancelled your afternoon meetings." Brian sighed. Oswald's summonses were always accompanied by tension, especially in recent months as the patriarch's health deteriorated and his methods of control became even more ruthless. He knew he had to go. He had never had a choice. The silver Porsche cut through the road leading to the family estate 2 hours later. Brian knew every curve of that road. He had grown up dividing his time between the city mansion and the ranch, always under the watchful eye of his grandfather. As he approached the imposing gates, a strange melancholy took hold of him. That place held his best and worst memories. It was there that he had learned to ride a horse, there that he had received his first scoldings for questioning the patriarch's decisions. And it was there that he stopped the car abruptly. A woman was in the middle of the dirt road, waving desperately. When he recognized her, his heart leaped in a way that surprised him. Marianne, the girl with the green eyes who had haunted his dreams that he didn't dare admit even to himself. Now a woman, more beautiful than his memories could capture, with her face flushed by the sun and an expression of panic. He got out of the car quickly. "Marianne!" "What happened?" "Brian, thank God you're here." She ran to him, and for a moment forgot all the social barriers that separated them. "It's your grandfather." He collapsed in the library. "Mom called the doctor, but he's asking for you. He's yelling that he needs to resolve something important before it's too late." The urgency in her voice made him forget everything. The strangeness of seeing her after months. The way her lavender perfume transported him back to adolescence, when he secretly watched her tending the rose bushes. He ran to the car but hesitated. "Come with me. You know him better than I do when he's in these states." Marianne hesitated. She had never been in Brian's car, had never been so close to him since she became an adult and understood that the boy of her childhood dreams was an unattainable world. But concern for her boss spoke louder. She got into the passenger seat, her hands trembling slightly. The Porsche flew down the road, kicking up a cloud of red dust. During the 5-minute drive to the main house, a silence charged with years of unspoken things hung between them. Brian felt her presence like electricity, and Marianne struggled to control her breathing, aware of every movement he made as he shifted gears. When they arrived at the mansion, Donna was waiting for them on the porch, her face pale with worry. "He's in the library, but he doesn't want anyone to enter. Only you, Brian." And she hesitated, looking at her daughter. "He specifically asked for Marianne, too." Brian and Marianne exchanged a look full of confusion. Oswald never asked for the presence of staff in moments of crisis. Something was different. Something was about to change irreversibly. They walked together through the marble hallways that Marianne knew like the palm of her hand, but which now seemed strange and threatening. With each step, she felt that she was approaching a precipice that she could not see. At the library door, Brian stopped and faced her. "Marianne, I don't know what he wants, but whatever it is, we'll face it together, okay?" She nodded, not knowing why those simple words made her heart beat as if it were about to explode. Together. They had never been anything together, except in her most secret dreams. The door opened, and Oswald Vasconcelos awaited them seated behind the centuries-old mahogany desk, his eyes still piercing despite his age, a sealed envelope in his trembling hands. "Finally," he said, his voice hoarse but full of authority. "Marianne, Brian, sit down. It's time for you to know the truth about the future of this family." The library smelled of old leather and guarded secrets. Marianne took the seat indicated by Oswald, her hands sweating against the simple fabric of her dress. Brian settled into the armchair beside her, and she could feel the heat radiating from him, a closeness that left her confused and alert at the same time. Oswald watched them silently for long seconds, like a predator studying its prey. When he finally spoke, his voice cut through the air like a blade. "Marianne, do you know why your grandmother came to work for this family?" The question caught her off guard. She needed the job, sir. "After my grandfather died..." "Lies." Oswald slammed the envelope on the table. "Helen Farrell came to work here because I owed your grandfather a debt. A debt that was never properly paid," Brian frowned. In 30 years of life, he had never heard this story. Marianne seemed equally lost, her green eyes searching for some explanation on the patriarch's impenetrable face. "Your grandfather, John Farrell, saved my life during the construction of the first power plant. An accident that could have killed me, but he pushed me away. He was crippled because of it. Died poor while I built an empire." Oswald paused, his fingers drumming on the envelope. "I'm 80 years old, Marianne. I won't live much longer. And one thing I've learned is that unpaid debts haunt generations." Marianne felt the ground disappearing beneath her feet. Brian leaned forward, a strange tension taking over his shoulders. "Grandfather, what are you trying to say?" "I'm saying that Marianne isn't just the granddaughter of the housekeeper. She is a creditor of this family, and as such, she will receive what is due to her." Oswald opened the envelope with trembling hands. "The Santa Helena Ranch, 500 acres of productive land, the colonial-style house that belonged to my father, and the organic coffee operations that generate $500,000 a year." The silence that followed was deafening. Marianne felt the blood drain from her face. Brian was paralyzed, processing his grandfather's words as if they were written in a foreign language. "Mr. Oswald," Marianne murmured, her voice almost inaudible, "I can't accept this. It's impossible." "Impossible." Oswald's eyes gleamed with something that seemed like cruel amusement. "Nothing is impossible when you have power, girl. And now you're going to have power." Brian finally found his voice. "Grandfather, the family, the other heirs, they will never accept this." "Ah, Brian." Oswald smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile. "That's exactly why I'm doing this. I want to see who in this family has true character, who will accept justice being done, and who will show their true greedy face." Marianne stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the wooden floor. I need air. She ran out of the library, leaving the two men in a charged silence. Brian followed her instinctively, finding her in the rose garden that she had tended since she was a teenager. Marianne was kneeling among the flowers, her hands trembling as she pulled weeds with mechanical movements. Marianne, wait. He approached slowly, as one approaches a wounded animal. No, she didn't look up. Don't say anything, Brian, please. You can't run from this. Now she faced him, and he saw tears shining in her eyes. Run? Do you think I want to run? Brian, you don't understand. I grew up in this house knowing exactly what my place was. I watched you from afar when we were kids, you with your expensive clothes and your private tutors, while I learned to fold your sheets. I fell in love with you when I was 16 years old, and you didn't even know I existed. The confession came out before she could contain herself. Brian was paralyzed, and she covered her face with her dirt-stained hands. My God, I shouldn't have said that. Marianne. Brian knelt beside her, and for the first time in years really touched her, his hands covering hers. Do you think I didn't know you existed? Do you think I didn't notice when you tended the roses, when you hummed while hanging the laundry on the line? Do you think I didn't long to talk to you but knew it would be inappropriate? She raised her eyes, and for a moment all the social barriers disappeared. It was just Brian and Marianne, two people who had grown up side by side but separated by invisible walls. Brian, this can't happen. What your grandfather is doing will destroy everything. Your family will hate me, and you'll be in the middle of a war I never wanted to start. What if I don't care what my family thinks? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with dangerous possibilities. Marianne shook her head. You do care, yes, and you should care. You have responsibilities, a legacy to protect. You're not just anything. Brian helped her up, their hands still intertwined. Marianne, my grandfather may be manipulative, but he's not crazy. If he's doing this, it's because you deserve it. Because your family deserved it a long time ago. Angry voices echoed from the main house. Through the open windows, they could hear Aunt Fern shouting, and the gruff voice of Cousin Carl demanding explanations. The news had spread, and the storm was just beginning. They're furious, Marianne murmured. They'll get over it. Brian squeezed her hands. Marianne, I want you to accept this inheritance. Not for me, not for my grandfather, but for you, for everything your family sacrificed. And then, after I become the owner of a ranch, after I have money, what happens to this? She gestured between them. Do you think we'll magically be able to be together? That your family will accept that you marry the former housekeeper, even if she now has money? Brian had no answer for that, and Marianne saw the doubt in his eyes. It was exactly what she feared. Even with money, even with property, she would always be the girl who grew up in the back of the mansion. Mr. Brian, Miss Marianne! Donna appeared on the porch, waving frantically. Mr. Oswald wants you back in the library, now! And he said you better prepare for a long conversation. Brian and Marianne exchanged glances. Their hands separated slowly, but the electricity between them remained. They knew that when they entered that library again, their lives would change forever. Let's go, said Brian, offering his arm to her with a formality that pained both of their hearts. As they walked back to the house, Marianne couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking straight into a trap that Oswald had carefully prepared. And the worst part of it all was that Brian would be the bait. 2 weeks later, Marianne found herself sitting at the mahogany desk of the Santa Helena Ranch. Papers scattered before her like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't put together. Numbers, contracts, production reports, all in a language she had observed from afar for years, but never really understood. The property was more beautiful than she remembered from the few times she had visited with her grandmother as a child. The yellow colonial house breathed history with its wide porches and lush gardens. But beauty didn't pay the bills or explain why the numbers from the last harvests were declining. The sound of tires on the dirt road made her look up. Through the window, she saw Brian's silver Porsche parking under the shade of a maple tree. Her heart leaped, as it always did when she saw him, But now there was an extra layer of tension. Oswald had insisted that Brian help her understand the business, and they both knew it was just another of the patriarch's manipulations. "Good morning, Madam Owner," Brian said as he entered, an ironic smile on his lips that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't call me that," Marianne pointed to the chair on the other side of the desk. "And you're late." "Sorry, had to take care of some business at the main company." He sat down and she noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. "How are the studies going?" Confusing. She pushed a report in his direction. "These numbers don't make sense. Production should be profitable, but the last 3 years show increasing losses." Brian examined the papers, his fingers drumming nervously on the wood. "It's what I suspected. Someone has been siphoning resources from this property for years. Probably my cousin Carl, who was nominally responsible for the ranch. Your cousin was stealing. Not exactly stealing. More like redirecting investments to other, more visible properties. Santa Helena has always been treated as the forgotten property of the family." Brian paused, his eyes meeting hers. "It's ironic that my grandfather gave you precisely this one. The one that needs the most care and attention." Marianne got up and went to the window, watching the coffee fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. "Sometimes I wonder if he did this on purpose, to give me something that looks valuable, but is actually a burden." "Marianne." "No, Brian, I'm serious." She turned to face him. "The whole family hates me now. Aunt Fern crosses the street when she sees me in town. Your cousin Carl has hired a lawyer to contest the will. And you..." She hesitated. "You're here because your grandfather sent you, not because you want to be." Brian stood up abruptly, walking towards her with an intensity that made her take a step back. "Do you think I'm here out of obligation? Isn't everyone always doing what Oswald Vasconcelos orders?" The question hit Brian like a punch. He looked away, his hands clenching into fists. "Not always." "What does that mean?" For a moment, Brian seemed to struggle with himself. Then, as if a dam had burst, the words began to flow. 3 years ago, I had everything planned. Passport, visa, a job offer in London. A tech company that wanted someone with experience in agribusiness to expand in Latin America. He leaned against the windowsill. "I was going to disappear. Leave a letter for my grandfather explaining that I couldn't live this life that wasn't mine anymore." Marianne felt her heart clench. "What happened?" My grandfather had his first heart attack. Right on the eve of my trip," Brian laughed bitterly. "The doctor said any additional stress could kill him. So I tore up the ticket, turned down the offer, and stayed here. Being the perfect grandson. Brian..." She took a step towards him instinctively. "You know what's the cruelest part? Part of me always suspected that he knew. That the attack was too convenient." Brian stared at her, raw vulnerability in his eyes. "You ask if I'm here out of obligation? Marianne, I've spent the last 3 years convincing myself that there was no choice. But the truth is, you make me want to find a reason to stay that isn't fear." The air between them became electrified. Marianne could hear her own heart beating, could feel the heat radiating from his body, even with the distance they maintained. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "I know." Brian reached out his hand, stopping inches from her face. "Can I?" She nodded, barely able to breathe. When his fingers touched her cheek, she closed her eyes, allowing herself for the first time to imagine what it would be like if things were different. "Marianne, I need you to know, what I feel for you has nothing to do with this inheritance. It has to do with the woman you are, the woman you've always been." Before she could answer, the sound of approaching cars separated them abruptly. Through the window, they saw 3 vehicles coming up the road. Aunt Fern's Mercedes, Carl's pickup truck, and behind them, Oswald's black limousine. "Shit," Brian murmured. "He brought the whole family." Marianne felt panic take over. "Why? What do they want here?" "I don't know, but it can't be anything good." Brian took her hand impulsively. "Marianne, whatever my grandfather is planning, promise me you won't let them intimidate you. This property is yours by right. What if I can't manage it? What if I prove that they were right all along? Then we'll learn together." The words came out before he could censor them, loaded with promises that they both knew were impossible. The cars stopped in front of the house, and through the windows they could see Oswald slowly descending from the limousine, leaning on his cane. Aunt Fern and Carl were talking animatedly, clearly agitated. "Whatever it is," said Brian, squeezing her hand one last time before letting go, "we'll face it together." Marianne nodded. But inside, a voice whispered that perhaps Oswald was about to reveal that everything, the inheritance, the forced proximity to Brian, even this moment of shared vulnerability, was part of a plan much bigger and crueler than either of them could imagine. The front door burst open, and the voices of the Vasconcelos family echoed through the colonial house, bringing with them the omen that the storm was just beginning. Oswald entered the colonial house like a conqueror returning to occupied territory, his cane tapping rhythmically on the wooden floor. Behind him, Aunt Fern examined every detail of the decor with thinly veiled disdain, while Carl leafed through papers with the expression of someone looking for flaws in a contract. "Marianne, dear," Oswald's voice echoed through the room, sweet as poisoned honey. "How are you adjusting to your new position?" Brian positioned himself slightly in front of Marianne, a protective gesture that did not go unnoticed by any member of the family. Aunt Fern raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "I'm learning, Mr. Oswald," Marianne replied, keeping her voice steady despite her nervousness. "Brian has been helping me understand the reports." "Ah, how convenient," Carl let out a cruel laugh. "The main heir teaching the, how should I call her now? Ex-maid? New owner? Carl?" Brian's voice cut through the air like ice. No, Brian, let him speak." Oswald raised his hand. "That's exactly why we're here. I need to see how our family is reacting to justice finally being done." Fern approached Marianne with the calculated gait of a predator. "Justice? Oswald, please. We all know what this really is. A senile guilt fantasy that's destroying our family." "Aunt Fern, I won't allow," Brian began. "You won't allow what, darling?" Fern smiled falsely. "That I tell the truth? That we all know this girl has always had a pathetic crush on you? That now, with money, she thinks she can finally have what she's always wanted?" The blood drained from Marianne's face. She felt the world spinning around her, the humiliation burning like acid in her veins. Brian took a step forward, his fists clenched. "That's enough. No, Brian, let them continue." Marianne raised her chin, finding a courage she didn't know she possessed. "I want to hear what you really think of me," Carl laughed. "You want honesty? Then here it is. You're a gold digger who grew up rubbing elbows with this family, waiting for the right chance to pounce. And now, with my senile and sick uncle, you got what you wanted. Enough." Brian's voice echoed through the house with a fury that no one had witnessed before. "I'm not going to stand here listening to you humiliate a woman who is worth more than all of us combined." The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes turned to Brian, who was breathing heavily, his self-control finally broken. "Brian," Oswald murmured, his eyes gleaming with something that seemed like satisfaction. "What a passionate defense. It's the defense she deserves. Marianne has spent her entire life serving this family without asking for anything in return. She took care of you when you were sick, Grandpa. She comforted Grandma in her last days. She did everything you asked with dignity and never complained." Brian turned to face Aunt Fern. "And you have the audacity to call her a gold digger?" "Brian, be careful what you say," Fern warned, but there was nervousness in her voice. "No, I'm going to say everything I should have said years ago." Brian walked to Marianne, taking her hand in front of everyone. "I fell in love with this woman when I was 17 years old. You think it was the inheritance that made me notice her? You have no idea how many nights I spent awake thinking about her. How many times I wanted to have the courage to break down the stupid barriers that this family built." Marianne felt tears burning her eyes. "Brian, don't." "Yes, Marianne. They need to know." He turned to the family, his hand still intertwined with hers. "You want to know the truth? I love this woman. I've always loved her, and if you can't see how extraordinary she is, the problem is you, not her." The declaration fell on the room like a bomb. Aunt Fern brought her hand to her chest, dramatically shocked. Carl shook his head in disgust. And Oswald smiled. Interesting, the patriarch murmured. Very interesting. Grandpa, I don't care what you think about... Actually, Brian, you should care a lot. Oswald walked slowly towards them, leaning heavily on his cane. Because what I think will determine the future of both of you. Marianne felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in Oswald's voice, a cruel satisfaction that terrified her. What does that mean? Asked Brian for the first time, uncertain. It means, my dear grandson, that you just fell into my trap perfectly. Oswald came closer, his eyes as cold as ice. You think I gave this property to Marianne out of guilt? Out of justice? How naive. I don't understand. I needed to be sure, Brian, sure that you had the strength and character necessary to lead this family. But I also needed to know where your loyalties lay. Whether you would be able to put your feelings above family interests. The realization hit Brian like a slap. You did this on purpose. The inheritance forcing us to work together. Every move was carefully calculated. Oswald smiled coldly. And now I know everything I needed to know. Marianne let go of Brian's hand, recoiling as if she had been burned. We were manipulated. Brilliantly manipulated, Oswald confirmed. And now we come to the crux of this little experiment. Aunt Fern and Carl exchanged satisfied glances, clearly aware of the plan from the beginning. What crux? Brian asked, although he already feared the answer. Oswald took an envelope from the inside pocket of his suit jacket. Marianne, dear, the time has come for you to make a choice. A choice that will define not only your future, but the future of my grandson as well. What kind of choice? Marianne could barely speak. Simple. You keep the inheritance and distance yourself definitively from Brian. Marry someone I approve of. Preferably someone from our social class. Prove that you can be a woman worthy of society. Or, he paused dramatically, you give up everything and condemn Brian to be disinherited with me as well. What? Brian exploded. Grandpa, you can't. I can and I will. If you choose this woman over your family, over your duty, then you are not the man I thought you were. And you don't deserve to inherit anything. Marianne felt the world collapsing around her. The trap closed perfectly. No matter what she chose, someone would be destroyed. You have 48 hours to decide, Oswald announced, heading towards the door. Oh, and Marianne, if you think about trying to have it both ways, the money and the boy, know that I have ways to make your lives a living hell. The choice is simple, love or security, but not both. The family left in silence, leaving Brian and Marianne alone in the middle of the room, their hands still intertwined, but now the touch burned like a mark of condemnation. The 48 hours turned into a macabre dance of postponed decisions and secret meetings. Brian and Marianne had agreed to meet away from the ranch, away from the watchful eyes of the Vasconcelos family, to try to find a way out of the labyrinth in which Oswald had imprisoned them. The small diner on the outskirts of town was the last place anyone would expect to find the heir to the Vasconcelos fortune. Brian arrived first, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, feeling ridiculous with the makeshift disguise. When Marianne walked in 10 minutes later, he barely recognized her. She had cut her hair and put on heavier makeup, transforming herself into someone completely different from the woman he knew. Paranoia or precaution? He asked when she sat down at the back table. Realism. Marianne ordered a plain coffee from the waitress. Your aunt hired a private investigator to follow us. Donna warned me last night. Brian's heart sank. How do you know? Because the man went to her house asking questions. He wanted to know about our relationship, how long we've known each other, if we've ever been seen together in compromising situations. Marianne lowered her voice. Brian, they're building a case against us. They want to prove that all of this is a sham, that I seduced you to get more money from the family. That's absurd. We've never what? Kissed, made love? Marianne laughed bitterly. Brian, that doesn't matter to them. The appearance of impropriety is enough. And after your declaration in front of the whole family? Brian ran his hands through his hair, frustrated. I don't regret what I said. I know. I don't regret it either. But that doesn't change the fact that we're trapped in a no-win situation. Marianne stirred her coffee nervously. There's more, Brian, things you need to know. What else? Your cousin Carl was at the ranch yesterday with a group of men. They introduced themselves as agricultural consultants, but I recognized one of them. It's Rick Newland, that lawyer who represents the family's interests in less than legal business dealings. Brian felt his blood run cold. Rick Newland was known in business circles as the man who solved problems that couldn't be solved by conventional means. What did they want? Officially? To assess the necessary improvements to the property. Unofficially, Marianne lowered her voice even further. They photographed everything. Every document, every contract, every financial report. And when I protested, Rick smiled and said I should get used to the idea that important people were going to want to know everything about my life now. Son of a bitch. Brian clenched his fists. They're looking for anything to discredit you, to prove that you're not competent to manage the property. Worse than that, they're looking for evidence that I'm manipulating you. Rick made a point of mentioning that it would be a shame if someone found out that the new heiress was using her position to seduce the family's main heir. Marianne took a sip of her coffee, her hands trembling slightly. Brian, they're going to try to separate us using any means necessary. Brian leaned over the table, taking her hand under the tablecloth. Then we're not going to let that happen. How? Your grandfather made it clear, either I choose the inheritance and distance myself from you, or we both lose everything. What if there's a third option? What third option? Brian hesitated, then made up his mind. I have a bank account in Switzerland, money that I've been saving over the years, investments I made without the family's knowledge. It's not a fortune, but it's enough for us to start a new life anywhere. Marianne stared at him in shock. Brian, are you talking about running away? About abandoning everything? I'm talking about choosing us, about not playing his game. Brian squeezed her hand. Marianne, I'm tired of living the life that others planned for me. If my grandfather wants to blackmail me, let him. But he can't force me to choose between you and a fortune I never wanted. What about your family? Your responsibility to the company? My family showed me exactly what they think of me when they decided to use me as a pawn in a cruel game. As for the company, it survived before me and it will survive after. Brian brought her hand to his lips, kissing it softly. The only thing I can't live without is you. For a moment, Marianne allowed herself to imagine a life far away from here, away from the manipulations and cruelties of the Vasconcelos family. Just her and Brian, free to love each other without judgments or conditions. But the fantasy was interrupted when her cell phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number with a single photo attached. It was an image of them at the diner table, their hands intertwined, clearly visible, taken through the window. The message accompanying the photo was simple. Interesting meeting. It would be a shame if this reached the newspapers before you make the right decision. RN. Marianne showed the phone to Brian, who paled. Rick Newland, he murmured. They followed us even with all the precautions. Brian, it's not just about following us. Marianne took the phone back. They're documenting everything. Every meeting, every intimate moment. They're building a narrative. What narrative? The one of the ambitious housekeeper who seduced the naive heir to get more money from the family. When that story hits the press, and it will, I'm going to be publicly destroyed. And you're going to look like a manipulated fool. Brian stood up abruptly. Then we run, today, now. Brian, stop and think. If we run, we'll only confirm everything they're saying. That I really manipulated you, that we're both guilty of some conspiracy against the family. And if we stay, they're going to make our lives a living hell until I accept your grandfather's ultimatum. Marianne stood up too, grabbing her purse. Brian, I need time to think, alone. Marianne, no. We decided this together. No, we didn't decide. Because you can afford to give up everything for love. You're always going to be Brian Mendez. You're always going to have your connections, your education, your opportunities. But me, She shook her head. If I lose this inheritance, Brian, I go back to being nobody. And if our relationship goes wrong in the future, I'm going to be lost with nothing. The pain on his face was like a punch to her stomach, but Marianne knew she needed to be cruel to be honest. Do you really think I would abandon you? I think people change. That love isn't always enough, and that I would be an idiot if I didn't consider that. She headed for the exit, but stopped and turned around. Brian, I love you, more than I thought it was possible to love someone. But loving you may be the most expensive decision of my life. She left the diner, leaving Brian alone with his doubts, and the weight of the realization that Oswald had orchestrated a situation where there were no victors, only different degrees of loss. In the parking lot, Marianne didn't see the man inside the dark car who photographed her departure. She didn't see the call he made immediately afterwards, nor did she hear the words that would seal the fate of the coming days. We have everything we need. You can initiate phase 2 of the plan. The trap was finally closed, and the siege about to tighten even further. Monday morning started with Marianne's phone ringing incessantly. First it was Donna, then 2 neighbors, then people she didn't even know had her number, all with the same question: had she seen the paper? When she finally got a copy of the Town Gazette, the local newspaper with the largest circulation, Marianne felt the world collapsing around her. The headline took up half of the front page: Mysterious Heiress, the secret romance that divides the Vasconcelos empire. The main photo showed her leaving the diner the day before, but there were others, many others. She and Brian talking in the ranch's garden, their hands intertwined during a walk on the property. A candid shot of him helping her out of the car, their faces dangerously close. The article was a masterpiece of sensationalist journalism, painting her as a calculating opportunist who had bewitched the Vasconcelos heir to secure her place in high society. It quoted sources close to the family, who described Marianne as a woman who had grown up watching and planning her social ascent since childhood. But the part that destroyed her the most was in the middle of the article, a statement attributed to Brian himself. Mr. Brian Mendez, when questioned about the nature of his relationship with the new heiress, was emphatic. Marianne Farrell is a person for whom our family has great affection, but any suggestion of romantic involvement is absurd. She is learning to manage a complex property, and I, as a family member, have a responsibility to guide her. Nothing beyond that. Marianne read the quote 3 times, each word sinking in like a knife in her heart. Her hands trembled so much that she could barely hold the newspaper. The phone rang again. It was Brian. Marianne, I can explain. Explain what? Her voice came out as a strangled whisper. How can you explain this, Brian? You said that any suggestion of romance between us is absurd. I never said that! Marianne, you have to listen to me. They twisted everything I said. Then what exactly did you say? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When Brian finally spoke, his voice sounded defeated. They ambushed me. Rick Newland showed up at my office yesterday afternoon with 2 reporters. He said they already had the whole story, that they just wanted my version of the facts before publishing. I tried to protect you. Protect me? By denying that you feel anything for me. I thought that if I denied it, they wouldn't have a story. That they would leave you alone. Brian sounded desperate. Marianne, they said that if I confirmed any romantic involvement, they would publish more compromising photos. Photos that would make you look like what, Brian? A prostitute? A gold digger? No, never. I just wanted to protect your reputation. Protect my reputation? Marianne laughed bitterly. Brian, you humiliated me publicly, made me look like a lunatic who imagined a romance that doesn't exist. Marianne, please, you have to understand. I understand perfectly. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. I understand that when the pressure increased, you chose to protect your family instead of protecting me. That's not true, isn't it? Then why didn't you call me yesterday after talking to them? Why did I have to find out about all this from the newspaper? Again, silence. Marianne knew she had hit the mark. Marianne! No, enough, Brian. Enough lies, enough manipulations, enough of being treated like a problem to be solved. She took a deep breath, finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. You made your choice. Now I'm going to make mine. What choice? The choice your grandfather offered me. I'm going to accept the inheritance and distance myself from you definitively. Marianne, no. Please, we can solve this. How, Brian? Do you think that after all this public humiliation, I'm going to be able to have a normal life with you? Do you think your family is magically going to accept our relationship after painting me as a fortune hunter in the newspapers? We run away. Like I said, we start a new life far away from here. With what money, Brian? With the secret account in Switzerland? Marianne laughed ironically. You think I didn't see the article mention that too? How do you think they found out? Someone from your family was listening to our conversation at the diner. Brian was silent, the reality of the level of betrayal finally sinking in. They know everything, Brian. Every move we made, every word we said. And you fell right into their trap when you denied our relationship to the reporters. Marianne, I love you. That hasn't changed. Maybe you do, but not enough to fight for me when it mattered. She closed her eyes, feeling the tears streaming down her face. Brian, I've spent my entire life being invisible to your family, being treated like furniture that moves and speaks. When I finally became visible, it was as the villain of the story. You're not a villain. To them I am. And apparently when you had to choose a side, you chose theirs. That's not true. Then why aren't you here now? Why are you calling me instead of being at my door, fighting for us? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Brian had no answer because both knew the truth. He was afraid. Afraid of the family, afraid of the scandal, afraid of the consequences. Is that it then? He asked finally. That's it? Marianne wiped her face. I'm going to call your grandfather today and accept his terms. I'm going to keep the inheritance, and I'm going to marry whoever he approves of. I'm going to become the society woman he wants me to be. Marianne, don't do that. Don't marry a stranger for revenge. Revenge? She laughed humorlessly. Brian, this isn't revenge. It's survival. Because after today, after this humiliation, I need to ensure that I'll never again depend on anyone's feelings to have a decent life. What about me? What happens to me? You go back to your privileged life. Marry some heiress your family approves of. Forget that I exist. Marianne took a deep breath. And if one day we meet on the street, you pretend you don't know me, like you always did before your grandfather forced our proximity. Marianne, goodbye, Brian. She hung up the phone and immediately dialed the Vasconcelos mansion. When Oswald answered, her voice was firm and resolute. Mr. Oswald? This is Marianne Farrell. I accept your terms. The patriarch's satisfied laughter echoed through the line, and Marianne knew that she had just sold her soul to the devil. But at least now she had a price. Across town, Brian threw the phone against the office wall, watching it shatter into 1,000 pieces. Like his heart, like his dreams, like the only true love he had ever known. At the mansion, Oswald hung up the phone and smiled at Aunt Fern and Carl, who were anxiously awaiting the result. It is done, he announced. The girl accepted. Brian learned his lesson about family loyalty. And our lineage is protected. What if he tries to win her back? Fern asked. After today's public humiliation? After the perceived betrayal? I highly doubt it. Oswald leaned back in his armchair, satisfied with his work. Some hearts, my dear, when broken properly, never mend. Meanwhile, in 2 different places in town, Brian and Marianne cried alone, each believing that they had been betrayed by the other, unaware that they had both been victims of the most cruel manipulation that Oswald Vasconcelos had ever orchestrated. 2 weeks had passed since Marianne had accepted Oswald's terms. 2 weeks of meetings with suitable suitors, men from good families who saw her as an interesting acquisition, a woman with enough money to be useful, but with humble origins enough to be controlled. She was sitting on the ranch's porch, watching the sunset paint the sky orange, when Donna approached with a tray of coffee and a troubled expression. Marianne, we need to talk. If it's about the engagement to Rick Taylor, Mom, I already said I accept. He's a decent man, has a respectable family. It's not about that. Donna placed the tray down with more force than necessary. It's about what they did to you and Brian. Marianne raised her eyes, surprised by the intensity in her mother's voice. Mom, we've already talked about this. Brian betrayed me when he gave that interview. He chose to protect his family instead of... He never gave any interview. The words fell like a bomb. Marianne was paralyzed. What did you say? Donna sat down beside her daughter, her hands trembling slightly. Marianne, I've worked in this house for 55 years. I know when people are lying, when they're plotting something. And I know that boy Brian never spoke to any reporter. But the statements in the newspaper were lies, fabricated. Donna took a crumpled envelope from her apron. I found this in the trash in Mr. Oswald's office 3 days ago. It was about to be burned with the other papers, but something told me to keep it. With trembling hands, Marianne opened the envelope. Inside, there were several sheets, drafts of statements attributed to Brian, different versions being tested, notes in the margins about which would be most effective to separate the two definitively. My God, Marianne murmured, reading the notes. They made it all up. There's more. Donna took another paper from her apron. Last night, Mr. Oswald received a call. He thought I had gone to sleep, but I was cleaning the hallway. I heard everything. Marianne took the paper, notes her mother had made about the conversation. It was with that lawyer, Rick Newland. They were discussing the success of the operation. Mr. Oswald said that you two fell perfectly into the trap, that you separated exactly as he planned. Donna pointed to a specific line in her notes. But what scared me the most was this. Marianne read aloud, "The final phase can begin. As soon as the girl marries Taylor, we contest the inheritance for undue influence. She'll lose everything, and Brian will learn that disobedience has permanent consequences." Marianne's blood ran cold. They never intended to let me keep the inheritance. Never. It was all a cruel charade to separate you and then destroy you completely. Donna held her daughter's hands. Marianne, that man not only manipulated you both, he's planning to ruin your life completely. Marianne stood up abruptly, walking to the porch railing. Her mind worked quickly, connecting dots that now made terrible sense. The engagement to Rick Taylor. It was part of the plan from the beginning, wasn't it? Rick is a distant cousin of Rick Newland, and more importantly, he has gambling debts that Oswald can use to control him. Donna approached her daughter. Marianne, you can't marry that man, not just because it would be a sham, but because after the wedding, when they take the inheritance from you, he'll blame you for everything. Mom, are you telling me that Brian never betrayed me? That everything was an elaborate lie? I'm saying that boy truly loves you, and that because of that, he became a threat to his grandfather's plans. Donna hesitated. Marianne, there's something you need to know about Brian. What? After that article came out in the paper, he tried to talk to all the reporters. He wanted to publish a retraction. He wanted to tell the truth. But suddenly the entire press stopped answering his calls. How do you know that? Because he came here 3 times. I didn't let you know because I thought it would be better, but he's desperate, Marianne. The last time, he was crying. Marianne felt her heart breaking again, but this time for the pain she had caused, not the pain she had suffered. Where is he now? I think he's still at his apartment in town. But Marianne, there's more. Mr. Oswald had his passport confiscated, and that account in Switzerland, it was blocked. Brian has no way to escape, even if he wanted to. The anger began to grow in Marianne's chest like a flame that had been contained for too long. Oswald had not only manipulated her feelings, he had systematically destroyed any possibility of happiness for her and Brian. Mom, I need your help. Anything, my daughter. I need proof. Documents, recordings, anything that proves what they did. Marianne turned around, her green eyes gleaming with determination. And I need to contact Brian without anyone knowing. Marianne, what are you planning? I'm planning to end this game once and for all. But first, I need allies. Donna smiled for the first time in weeks. You have more allies than you imagine, my daughter. Mike the driver hates the way they treated you. The cook, Rosa, always liked you. And there's the gardener, Tony. He saw Rick Newland planting listening devices in your house. Listening devices? How do you think they knew all your conversations with Brian? Even the one at the diner was recorded. They had someone at the table next to you with a directional microphone. The magnitude of the betrayal was becoming clear. Oswald had left nothing to chance. Mom, can you get me in contact with Brian without anyone suspecting? I can. I can take him to the old chapel on the property tonight. No one has gone there in years. Perfect. Marianne picked up the papers her mother had saved. And Mom, I need you to help me find the other documents. Everything that proves their plan. It's going to be dangerous. If Mr. Oswald finds out, he already destroyed my life once. I'm not going to let him do it again. Marianne hugged her mother. This time, I'm going to fight. As the sun finished setting, Marianne felt a fundamental change within herself. She was no longer the scared girl who had passively accepted the destiny that others had chosen for her. Now she understood that she had been a pawn in a much larger and crueler game. But games had rules, and she was about to find out how to break them all. At the main mansion, Oswald toasted with Aunt Fern and Carl, celebrating the success of his plan. He didn't know that in the back room, a determined housekeeper was collecting the evidence that would bring down his empire of lies. And in town, Brian looked out the window of his apartment, unaware that in a few hours he would discover that the love of his life had never stopped believing in him, and that together they were about to deliver the final blow to the tyranny of Oswald Vasconcelos. The final war was about to begin. The old chapel was shrouded in shadows when Marianne arrived, her hands trembling as she pushed open the decaying wooden door. Moonlight filtered through the broken stained glass windows, creating colorful patterns on the stone floor. Brian was already there, sitting in the first pew, his head in his hands. When he heard her enter, he turned around quickly. Even in the dim light, she could see the pain in his eyes, the marks of sleepless nights, the stubble that spoke of a man who had lost all hope. Marianne, his voice was an incredulous whisper. Mike said you wanted to see me, but I thought... You thought I hated you. She walked slowly towards him. As I thought you had betrayed me. Brian stood up, maintaining a respectful distance. Marianne, about the interview in the newspaper. You never gave any interview. The words came out loaded with certainty and pain. They fabricated everything, didn't they? The relief on his face was almost tangible. How did you find out? My mother found the drafts in your grandfather's trash. Different versions of your statements being tested until they found the one that would hurt us the most. Marianne took the papers out of her coat. Brian, we've been manipulated since day one. He took the documents, his eyes quickly scanning the evidence of his grandfather's betrayal. When he finished reading, his expression had changed from relief to a controlled fury that she had never seen before. He orchestrated everything. Every moment, every forced encounter, every impossible choice. Brian crumpled the papers. Marianne, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for believing that you would leave me for money. I'm so sorry for not fighting harder when I saw that article. We were both idiots. Marianne took a step towards him. He knew us too well. Knew exactly which buttons to push to make us doubt each other. But why now? Why did you find out the truth now? Because he made a mistake. He got too confident. Marianne smiled for the first time in weeks. My mother overheard a conversation between him and Rick Newland. Brian, the inheritance was always a sham. As soon as I married Rick Taylor, they were going to contest everything in court, and I would lose every penny. Son of a bitch. Brian clenched his fists. He never intended to fulfill the agreement. No. The plan was always to separate us, humiliate me, and then destroy my life completely. A lesson for anyone who dared to challenge the power of the Vasconcelos. Brian walked to her, stopping just inches away. Marianne, I love you. I've always loved you, and I swear on everything that is sacred that I won't let him destroy us. Neither will I. She raised her face to meet his eyes. Brian, I have a plan, but it's going to be dangerous, and I need to know if you're willing to bet everything. Everything, including your family's inheritance. Because if we do this, there's no going back. Brian held her face in his hands. Marianne, I already lost you once because of the fear of disappointing my family. I'm not going to make the same mistake twice. He kissed her then, and it was as if all the barriers that had been built between them disintegrated instantly. It was a kiss loaded with months of longing, of shared pain, of love that had resisted all the manipulations. When they separated, both were breathing heavily. What's the plan? Asked Brian. Tomorrow is the engagement dinner that your grandfather organized for me and Rick. The whole family will be there, plus some influential friends from society. Marianne smiled, but there was something predatory in that smile. We're going to give them a show they'll never forget. The main hall of the Vasconcelos mansion had never been so elegant. Crystals sparkled under the chandelier lights. Exotic flowers decorated each table, and the guests, the cream of local society, chatted animatedly while awaiting the official presentation of the bride. Oswald was in his element, receiving compliments for the generosity of giving an inheritance to the housekeeper's granddaughter, and for guiding her towards an appropriate marriage. Aunt Vern and Carl circulated among the guests, ensuring that everyone knew the official version of the story. Rick Taylor, the groom, looked nervous but satisfied. A 40-year-old man with gambling debts and a desperate need for money, he had readily accepted the arranged marriage proposal. "Where is the bride?" asked one of the guests. "She must be getting ready," replied Oswald with a satisfied smile. "You know how women are with these special occasions." At that moment, the double doors of the hall opened dramatically. Marianne entered wearing an elegant navy blue dress, her hair pulled back in a sophisticated updo. She was stunning, but there was something in her posture, a fierce confidence that made some guests whisper among themselves. Behind her, to the absolute shock of everyone, was Brian. "Good evening," said Marianne, her voice cutting clearly through the buzz. "Thank you all for coming to my engagement dinner." Oswald stood up slowly, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "Marianne, dear, what is Brian doing here?" "He's here because I invited him, Mr. Oswald. After all, it's important that the whole family is present when I announce my engagement." Rick approached, clearly confused. "Marianne, should we tell the truth to everyone present?" Marianne smiled at him with false sweetness. "What an excellent idea, Rick." She walked to the center of the hall, and Brian positioned himself beside her. The tension in the air was palpable. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marianne began, her voice clear and firm, "you came here today thinking you were going to witness the announcement of my engagement to Rick Taylor. But in reality, you are going to witness something much more interesting. The exposure of one of the cruelest manipulations you have ever seen." A murmur of shock ran through the hall. Oswald stepped forward. "Marianne, what do you think you are doing?" "I'm telling the truth, Mr. Oswald, about how you orchestrated an elaborate sham to separate Brian and me, about how you fabricated false statements in the newspapers, about how you never intended to fulfill the terms of the inheritance you promised me. You're delusional, girl." "Am I?" Marianne nodded, and Donna entered the hall carrying a box of documents. "Because I have here all the drafts of the false statements attributed to Brian. I have recordings of your conversations with Rick Newland, planning how to destroy me after the wedding. And I have witnesses." Mike, the driver, entered accompanied by other staff members. All carried determined expressions. "Mr. Oswald," said Mike, "we heard and saw everything. The listening devices you installed in Marianne's house. The times you bragged about having broken Brian's will. How you laughed when you said you were going to leave Marianne with nothing after she served her purpose." Oswald's face was turning red with anger. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, we can." Brian spoke for the first time, taking a small recorder from his pocket. "Including the conversation you had with me last night, when you thought I was sleeping due to the sedatives you had put in my drink." The recording began to play. And Oswald's voice echoed through the hall. The boy has finally learned his lesson. He thinks he lost the woman because of his own weakness. He'll never suspect that everything was planned. And when little Mary Ann loses the inheritance after the wedding, she'll understand the price of challenging our family. The silence that followed was deafening. The guests looked from Oswald to Mary Ann with expressions of shock and horror. "My God, Oswald," murmured one of the society ladies. "What have you done?" "I protected my family," the patriarch exploded. "I couldn't allow my grandson to marry a maid." "Maid?" Mary Ann laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. "Mr. Oswald, you spent so much time treating me as inferior that you forgot one very simple thing. I grew up in this house. I know every secret, every scheme, every dirty deal you've made over the years." She nodded again, and Rick Newland was escorted into the hall, in handcuffs. "Rick decided to cooperate with the authorities," explained Brian. "It seems he was tired of being just a pawn in your games." "Grandpa." Oswald recoiled, finally understanding that he had completely lost control of the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen," said Mary Ann, her voice stronger than ever, "the engagement dinner is cancelled because I'm not going to marry Rick Taylor." She turned to Brian, extending her hand. "I'm going to marry the man I love, despite all efforts to separate us." Brian took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Mary Ann Farrell, do you take me as your husband? Knowing that this means giving up the inheritance, facing the fury of my family, and starting a new life with me?" "I do," she replied, her voice clear and strong. "Because the only inheritance I want is our love." The guests began to applaud, some crying with emotion at the most sincere declaration they had ever witnessed. Oswald, defeated and humiliated, leaned heavily on his cane. "You'll regret this." "No, Grandpa," said Brian, putting his arm around Mary Ann's waist. "We're going to regret having wasted so much time because of your games." 6 months later, Brian and Mary Ann were married in a simple ceremony in the old chapel on the ranch. There was no Vasconcelos fortune, but there was something much more valuable, a love that had survived the cruelest of manipulations. Brian used his business skills to build a business of his own, away from his grandfather's shadow. Mary Ann transformed a small part of the property that she managed to keep into a social project for low-income youth. And Oswald Vasconcelos, who had spent his life controlling the destinies of others, discovered that true love was the only force that his manipulations could never destroy. On the porch of the Yellow House, where it had all begun, Brian and Mary Ann watched the sunset, their hands intertwined, finally free to love without fear, without secrets, without conditions. Love had won, and they had discovered that true wealth was not in inheritances or fortunes. It was in the courage to fight for each other, no matter the price.